and then we will get started. Today's demonstration should go really quickly because the modification process in the online system is super easy. That is largely thanks to Rod and Audra, who are on the call with me today. We have a few folks joining, but we are recording this and it is going to be available on our website. So we will get started here in just a minute. And I do want to go over, I'll have a short presentation and then we'll just jump into our demonstration. So we will kick it off in just a moment. Okay. Let's get this show on the road. I am Joey Pena, and I'm the Cannabis Process Navigator for the Department of Excise and Licenses. Thank you for joining us today. I'm joined by a couple of my colleagues on our analytics and implementation team. I'm going to let them introduce themselves before we kick off with a short presentation, followed by a demonstration of how to apply for a modification of premises in the new online permitting and licensing center. So Rod, would you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rod Picasari. I am the Technology Manager for Excise and Licenses, and I was responsible for being the project manager for bringing all of marijuana online.
And Audra?
Hi, my name is Audra Miller, and I'm an applications analyst with the team, and I do what Rod tells me to do.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This is going to be a somewhat brief presentation today, and that is largely thanks to all of the tremendous work that Rod and Audra have done to really simplify our amendment processes in the online permitting and licensing center. So to provide a little bit of context for you, we have, as you all know, we have started the process of transitioning all existing marijuana licenses into the online permitting and licensing center. And as a result, all amendment applications will be submitted through the online permitting and licensing center. And today we are doing a demonstration of the modification of premises application. Over the next 2 weeks, we're also going to be doing demonstrations of the change of location and change of ownership amendments in the online system. I think that what you'll see through these demonstrations is that there is a tremendous amount of value created by the online system and the transition to online applications. And there are quite a few efficiencies that have been created for our customers and for our licensing technicians in our department. So I am going to get us started by kicking off with just a very brief PowerPoint presentation. I'll share my screen here in just a moment. Excellent. Okay. Let's start here. So welcome to our marijuana business license online demonstration. Today, we're going to be talking about the modification of premises applications in the online permitting and licensing center. Today and over the next 2 weeks, what you'll get is an introduction to amendment applications in our online permitting and licensing center. So when we talk about amendments, we're talking about a modification of premises, a change of location, a change of ownership. And what you'll see as we go through these processes is that there are quite a few things that the system is going to enable you to do when you're amending your licenses. So just as a recap, this is something that I think that we are all familiar with by now. Each of my presentations has included this information. This is for context, but we have new application processes, applications for most marijuana business licenses, including new business licenses, renewals, modifications of premise, changes of location, and changes of ownership must be submitted through Denver's online permitting and licensing center. This requires all of our applicants prior to submitting an amendment to transition their existing licenses to the online permitting and licensing center. And we have done webinars. Audra has created a number of really helpful online training videos. All of that is on our website to help people navigate the transition to the online permitting and licensing center before a planned amendment. The exception, as we said before, testing and research and development facilities will continue to use paper applications for the time being, with our goal to get those migrated to the online permitting and licensing center sometime in 2023. Again, very similar to what you've seen in other presentations, some tips for getting started with the online permitting and licensing center. We recommend that you use a Safari or a Chrome web browser for optimal user experience. We always recommend that you prepare to submit your application by visiting our website to see required documents and information before you begin. And then we also recommend that you gather all of your required documents and information before you start and save required documents as PDF or JPEG files only. We will not be able to accept other file types. Talking about modifications of premise, required documents, we have done a tremendous amount of work to try to streamline the amount of information we're collecting from applicants when we have them apply for a modification of premise or when they submit another amendment application. So as a part of that, one of my favorite features is that we have significantly reduced the number of required documents that we collect with most business license applications. So for a modification of premise, for example, what you'll see is that you have 2 required documents. We'll talk first about the valid zoning use permit. Valid zoning use permit is required and must reflect changes that might be made during the modification. I'm going to go over that a little bit more in detail. We do understand that our partners in zoning have a tremendous amount of work on their plate. And so if you have just started that process of applying for your new zoning use permit, you can submit an acknowledgement of zoning use permit form. That acknowledgement can be used to submit the modification of premises application, but a modification of premises application will not be approved and licenses will not be issued if the applicant does not provide a valid zoning use permit. So to really break this down into some additional detail, consider that if you have multiple licenses or multiple uses at a single location. So in the example that I'm going to share with you today as we're going through the demonstration, I've created a licensed establishment with store, cultivation, and manufacturing licenses. A valid zoning use permit would need to be sure that it reflects all of those uses for the activity that's occurring in that licensed premises. If I'm going to be modifying my premises in a way that may require me to update my zoning use permit, I do need to be sure that I am going through that process with our commercial zoning team. So as an example, if you are planning to expand your extraction space or space where you are conducting commercial kitchen activity or commercial food preparation, what you'll want to be sure is that your zoning use permit reflects that you are allowed to do that. So zoning use permits often have some square footage restrictions on certain activities. And certainly in some zone districts, there is a difference between allowing general manufacturing or heavy manufacturing. And so depending on the square footage of something like a manufacturing operation, you may need to have your zoning use permit updated before you're able to complete your modification of premises. If your zoning use permit sort of covers everything that is included in your modification of premises, if you are not going to be expanding square footage of different activities, retail activity, cultivation or plant husbandry activity, manufacturing activity, if you're sort of working within the scope and doing sort of more aesthetic or things that may require building permits, but don't necessarily go into the realm of zoning, then your existing zoning use permit may actually cover the modification of premise. What we would recommend is that as you're looking at your zoning use permit and thinking about your modification of premise, that you would reach out to zoning.review@denvergov.org if you have a question or unsure whether your current zoning use permit does reflect the changes that would be made during that modification. So if you're able to make the changes without updating your zoning use permit, it's always good to sort of check that with the zoning team by emailing zoning.review@denvergov.org. Next, your copy of the current and proposed floor plan must be included in a modification of premises application. You will combine that into a single PDF. We have here and a link on our website to a free online tool where you can merge those documents into a single file. You will have the current copy that must be legibly labeled current floor plan, and then a proposed copy that must be legibly labeled proposed floor plan. We will look at those two documents side by side when we are evaluating your modification of premises application. So it is required that you submit both the current and the proposed. If you're unsure about what your current floor plan is, if you think that you might have an updated floor plan, but you don't have it in your business records, you can reach out to exlapplications@denvergov.org to request information about your current floor plan. Otherwise, to the best of your knowledge, the current floor plan that you have that you believe is the current floor plan on file with the department, you would submit that with the proposed floor plan. And we do have a really handy example that I'm going to click through on one of these future slides to show you sort of what that looks like. So changes to the modification of premises applications, this is something that we just want everyone to be aware of. It is different from how modification applications were submitted when we were accepting only paper applications, but you will not be paying an application fee up front. Instead, a licensing technician is going to review your application and determine whether fees and inspections are required. So the question that you may be asking is, well, how do you know whether fees or inspections are required? Fees and inspections, here is an example of something that would not require fees or inspections. Fees and inspections would not be required for stores that are modifying their premises to comply with new safe storage requirements. As a result of the most recent change in the Denver Marijuana Code, many of you who own stores or who work sort of in consulting or the legal realm know that there are new safe storage requirements for every store in Denver. And we have committed to try to streamline that process for our stores. And so a modification of premise is required, but fees and inspections will not be required if the change is to comply with those safe storage requirements. Also, fees and inspections would not be required for the addition or removal of video surveillance cameras. And if adjustments need to be made to your proposed floor plan, if you are going through the process, determine that you may need to make some adjustments. Perhaps you need to remove an additional wall or you need to build an additional wall. If those adjustments need to be made, those new copies of your floor plan are going to be uploaded in the online permitting and licensing center. And we are going to provide you with more information on how to do that. Ultimately, what you're going to see and understand, for many of you who've been involved in the licensing process for a number of years, we used to have a request to amend floor plan application. We do not have the request to amend floor plan application anymore. Instead, everything is filtered through this modification of premises application. And that is why you do not pay the fee up front. It's why we will review that application to determine whether the fee or inspection is required. So for some of the activity that used to necessitate a request to amend floor plan, specifically the addition or removal of video surveillance cameras, all of that happens through the modification of premises now, and we just don't assign fees or inspections. So very similar to our request to amend floor plan application, but to streamline it, to keep it in one application, to keep it in sort of one record ID, we have made this all a modification of premise, and you can sort of think about it as having the major modifications or a minor modification versus the request to amend floor plan. All right. The first steps to apply for a modification of premise, I'm going to walk us through this here in just a few minutes in a demonstration. We are going to log in to Denver's online permitting and licensing center. And then under business, short-term rental and occupational licensing, we will click renew or manage. You find the row with the licensed establishment, record name and address that you want to modify. And then in the right column, you'll click Amendment. You'll select Modify Premises and then continue your application. This is going to be one of the simpler things that you can do in the new online system. The online system is really streamlining so many of these application processes. I think we will see it most. Many of our customers, I think, are going to see a tremendous amount of value created by this modification process that I'm going to demonstrate. The resources for navigating our online processes, we have Denver's medical and retail marijuana licenses and permits webpage. I mentioned earlier, Audra Miller, who's on the call with us, created a number of extremely valuable, extremely helpful online training videos. We have a link to that here. You'll also find a link to that on just about every page that is on our licenses and permits webpage, including the modification of premises webpage, where we will post this webinar probably in the next week or two. And then the modification of premises online webpage also has a step-by-step guide and required information and documents so that you can prepare to submit your application there. So if you find yourself starting the process and you're a little bit unsure of how to proceed, you can always visit our website, apply for a modification of premise of a marijuana business license online, and you'll find the step-by-step guide and that required information. Last, we have been asking if you need support, if you have questions about your application, to please email exlapplications@denvergov.org, and please do not copy other aliases, marijuana info or EXL submit, or other individuals. That will create duplicate Salesforce cases, and you will not receive a response. If you copy other aliases or individuals, you'll be asked to resubmit your inquiry directly to exlapplications@denvergov.org, and it will delay our ability to respond. So again, any kind of request for support, Rod and Audra's team have been fantastic at jumping into the EXL applications inbox and managing the technical issues that some of our customers are experiencing when there's sort of one of those rare, strange bugs that pops up. So continue to email EXL applications to request that support. And now we are going to transition over to the Online Permitting and Licensing Center, where I will do a demonstration of how to apply for a modification of premise. Okay, here we are. Excellent. So the very first thing I do want to show you is that modification of premises webpage. So here from medical and retail marijuana licenses and permits, this is our landing page for our marijuana licenses and permits. You can select apply for a modification of premise of a marijuana business license online. And on this page, what you'll find is some basic information about the modification of premises process and what requires a modification of premises. You'll find a helpful step-by-step process for how to apply for a modification of premises online. That includes that link to the online trading videos webpage that I mentioned earlier. It includes some really helpful information on how to navigate that online permitting and licensing system, and then discusses some of the next steps in terms of city application review and inspection. And down at the bottom, what you'll find are required forms and information about floor plan requirements. This was something that I had wanted to revisit with you, so I will open these floor plan requirements. You see we've created examples of floor plans, and that has information about the floor plan requirements here. So all of the information about what would be required on a floor plan and how we're going to evaluate a floor plan for compliance is included here on this page. And then what you'll see is, particularly for a modification of premises, we have created some examples of what floor plans may look like. You'll note that for a modification of premises, again, you have to provide copies of your current and proposed floor plans. So we ask that that current copy be legibly labeled current floor plan, and the proposed copy of the changes after the modification would be labeled proposed floor plan. So down below is really what we've developed to help you better understand what that looks like. This is a sort of basic example of what a floor plan would be for a licensed establishment that includes a cultivation license a store license, and a manufacturing license. You'll see that we have current floor plan here with my license numbers and a legend or a key that shows that the licensed premises is outlined in red, which is one of our requirements, that the limited access area is outlined in green, and that our security cameras are designated by this blue triangle. You'll see that all of this is here with our POS is labeled restricted access area in the retail sales floor, and then down below the proposed floor plan where I've just made some adjustments in where certain activity is taking place for the purposes of developing this and for also our demonstration today. But you'll see that the proposed floor plan also includes the license numbers, the legend or the key, and it has that red and green line with every room legibly labeled with their principal uses, restricted access area in the retail sales floor, and the point of sale systems there at the top in that retail sales space. So this is a very handy document if you are developing your floor plans, preparing them for your application. I'd recommend that you review this very carefully, that you read through these requirements very carefully, so that when you submit your floor plan in this process, you're less likely to get it kicked back to you and asked for corrections if you follow this as carefully as possible. All right, so now here in our online permitting and licensing center, our first step is to log in. And what you'll see when you log in is that page where you can, under business, short-term rental, and occupational licensing, apply for a new marijuana business license. This is also where you would transition your license, where you renew or manage your license, or you search your records. So for the purposes of today's demonstration, I'm going to renew or manage my licenses so I can submit a marijuana modification of premises application online. The next step in this process is to find the line that has the licensed establishment at the location with the record name that I want to amend. So what you'll notice here is that I have 3 licenses, all at 201 West Colfax Avenue. I have a marijuana store license, a marijuana cultivation facility license, and a marijuana infused product manufacturer license. When I submit a modification of premise to my licensed establishment, that is going to filter down to all of the licenses that live at that location. This is one of the really tremendous values of the online system, is that you'll remember in sort of the previous world, you would submit an application for each of the licenses, and you would receive 4 amend record IDs, and then you would have to manage the inspections for each one of those amend record IDs. This is going to simplify this process so much more because you are going to be amending your licensed establishment that will filter down. So you will receive one combined amend record ID when you complete and submit your application. So I'm going to click on Amendment, Modify Premise, and I'm going to continue my application. Here, this gives you an overview of what you will need to provide. You will need to provide a copy of that zoning use permit or the acknowledgement of zoning use permit form. You will provide a floor plan that meets the requirements for marijuana licensing and that also meets the requirements for your modification of premise. So we would recommend again that you review this page very carefully. You're sure that you have a current and proposed copy of your floor plan, and then a description of your planned modification. We're going to continue. And what you'll see here is that we would ask you to write a full description of what the modification you're making to that existing floor plan. This is where it's extremely critical that you provide as much information as possible, that you provide a very detailed description of the modification that you're making. And if you are a store modifying your premise for the purpose of complying with safe storage requirements, that you also include that information here in this box. That is the information that our licensing technicians need when they're evaluating your application and looking at your floor plan to make the determination of whether there are fees and inspections required. You should absolutely fill this in to the best of your ability, as detailed as possible, and be sure that the information that you provide here is true and accurate to the very best of your knowledge. So to move us through, I'm describing the changes that I'm making. And I am using this floor plan as sort of the floor plan that I would be submitting for my modification of premises. So I've described the activity based on the current and proposed floor plans here. I've written a short paragraph about how those changes look, and then I'm going to continue my application. This is going to ask you a few questions about the modifications that you're planning to make. And for the purposes of our demonstration, I'm going to select no for each of these, but we do recommend that you read each of these carefully. Is the proposed modification of premise for a marijuana store in an IB zone use district? Is the proposed modification of premise for a marijuana cultivation facility in a zone district other than IA, IB, OSB, I0, I1, I2, or OS2 zone use district? Will the proposed modification of premise result in the addition of a marijuana extraction room or an expansion of marijuana extraction space beyond what was previously permitted? So this is a question that again goes back to that zoning use permit. And then will the proposed modification of premise result in an address change or in the expansion of your licensed premise? For example, through the addition of an adjacent unit or collapse of unit numbers or addresses. I'm going to select no for each of these and continue my application. You'll see that I get to my required documents checklist. And I'm going to go ahead and upload here a zoning use permit and a floor plan that would meet the requirements of marijuana licensing. Again, I really can't emphasize enough to continue to go back to this document and be sure that you are including all of the relevant information that is going to make it easy for our licensing technicians to take a look at this. You have to remember too that inspectors are going to be using this floor plan when they evaluate the premises. So do be sure that that floor plan meets all of those requirements. Upload that here and continue your application. And then you have an opportunity to review the information contained in your application. This says, this is the description of my modification. So if I need to edit that information, I can do that here. This is the answer to each of those questions about the modifications where I can also edit. And then my documents that I have uploaded, my zoning use permit and my floor plan. Read very carefully the oath of application. Agree to the above certification and continue your application. Now, what you'll see is you have a combined record ID, combined amend record ID. This combined amend record ID, as I said before, does cover all of the licenses at the licensed establishment. So I modified the licensed establishment, which was 201 West Colfax Avenue. And at 201 West Colfax Avenue, I have 3 licenses. Now, for the purposes of inspections and for the purpose of closing this modification of premise in the future, this is the one combined amend record ID. I don't have to submit separate applications for each of those licenses. I only need to submit separate applications if I have different licenses at different licensed establishments that I'm amending. So this combined amend record ID is now what I will use to refer back to my modification of premises application. You'll see here, this should now appear in my records for my combined amend, modify premises, and that application is pending. So the information here will provide any updates that there may be as my modification of premise moves through the process with our licensing technicians. And then when there is, if a licensing technician determines that a fee is required, then I would pay fees due on that combined amend to be sure that my application will move forward with processing. And that may be the shortest webinar that I ever have to do, because the modification of premises process is that simple. We have streamlined this process to really focus on the activity at the licensed establishment, which is why you're amending the licensed establishment when you're submitting a modification of premises application. And that is going to touch each of those licenses that lives there now. This combined amend is the modification of premises for those 3 licenses at that licensed establishment. And now the process sort of goes back to after I have submitted, this will tell me that I will pay any required fees. So a licensing technician is going to do their review of that application, determine whether fees and inspections are required. That quality control review could take up to 20 business days. We are working through a lot of new processes here, so there have been delays in some of the processing of these applications, and I apologize for that. We are going to continue to try to work through those as quickly as possible. And this is going to tell you how to pay fees due if fees are assessed. After that, when the city licensing technician's review is complete and those required fees are paid, you would receive a notice to complete any required inspections. Remember that inspections are not going to be required for every modification of premise because we've really combined that request to amend floor plan with the modification of premises amendment. So when inspections are required, you will use the inspection notification, the inspection notice that you receive by email to call in for your inspections. And when all of that is passed, you are going to, when you've completed the required city inspections, email exlapplications@denvergov.org with that combined amend record ID for the modification of premise, proof of state approval for the modification of premise, or if no state application was required, an email from a representative at the Marijuana Enforcement Division who can confirm that no state application was required, and a request to close the combined amend record ID for the modification of premise. When that is done, a licensing technician will update your record with the new floor plan. And with that, I will stop sharing. Pop over to see if there are any questions so far. We have no questions in our Q&A. I had a feeling that this was going to be a relatively simple one. And again, that is largely thanks to all of Rod and Audra's incredible work on this system, really to identify those efficiencies for our customers. I'll give it another few seconds to see if anyone wants to pop a question in or if anyone wanted to raise their hand to ask a question. Otherwise, we will get quite a bit of our time back from this presentation today. I want to thank you all for attending. We are going to be posting this to that modification of premises webpage so that the webinar is available for anyone who wants to watch and walk through the demonstration on how to apply for their modification of premises online. Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you being here today. And next week, we will be going over changes of location, and the following week, changes of ownership. So I do hope that you can join us again so that we can really talk more about these amendment applications as we make this transition to the Online Permitting and Licensing Center. Thanks so much. Have an excellent day.
Bye, Joey.
Bye.